Do you spend hours in your head thinking about something that happened, could have happened, or might happen? Do you ask others what to do so you don't make a mistake? Welcome to the Playing It Safe podcast. I am Dr. Z, your host. I am a clinical psychologist, an author, and a person that is super passionate about sharing with you science-based skills to overcome any type of fear-based struggles. Who doesn't experience fear? Who doesn't play it safe? In this show, we will discuss how fear-based reactions happen in day-to-day life, how playing it safe behaviors look like, sound like, and feel like, how you can put into action solid tips from behavioral science to get unstuck from worries, fears, obsessions, and anxieties, and how you can start doing what works, what matters, and what you care about. Behavioral science doesn't have to be boring. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. 60% of people dealing with depression are also dealing with anxiety. So if you are anxious, you are also likely to be depressed. In the case of fear-based struggles, it is much more common to struggle with different types of fears than a single one. So, for example, if you are dealing with panic attacks, it's also possible that you are dealing with chronic worry. Or if you are dealing with chronic worry, it's also possible that you are dealing with fears of loneliness. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a particular type of cognitive behavior therapy. But traditional cognitive behavior therapy focuses on treating a single disorder, a single struggle, such as social anxiety or depression. The problem with focusing in a single disorder is that the root cause of those struggles is not addressed. And on top of that, if we don't look at the common drivers across multiple psychological struggles, then we are treating problems in isolation, but in fact they are coexisting with each other, they intertwine with each other. A core characteristic of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, is to focus on teaching you psychological skills to increase your well-being, mental health, and quality of your life. Instead of focusing on a single diagnosis, ACT tackles the drivers of that particular diagnosis. So ACT by nature is what is called a process-based model, a process-based therapy. In this interview, I chat with Dr. Joseph Chiarocchi, who is among the top 1% most cited scientists in the world because of his work on the development and promotion of well-being. Joseph's work focuses on psychological flexibility, or what he calls flexible strength. Flexible strength is a cluster of skills that can be used to promote personal growth and build vitality and valued actions. Examples of skills related to flexible strength are emotional intelligence, social intelligence, mindfulness, psychological flexibility, non-attachment, grit, equanimity, willpower, and emotion regulation skills. In this conversation, Joseph and I chat about the different psychological processes that are part of any struggle you are dealing with. Whether you are dealing with fears of public speaking, anxieties related to your performance, fears of abandonment, fears of loneliness, fears of not being good enough, urges to do things right and perfectly, Joseph shows how key psychological processes apply to all those struggles. We also talk about the relationship between psychological processes and evolution, about the importance of variation, selection, retention, and context as drivers of change, and about the challenges of letting go of all those stories that your mind tells you about who you are. I had so much fun chatting with Joe. As you will hear on this episode, we tease each other, we laugh, and we talk a lot about how behind all those moments of stuckness we go through, there are key psychological processes and key psychological skills we all can learn to get unstuck and do the stuff that matters to us. And finally, I do have an important announcement for you. I am launching an online class on ACT for perfectionistic, high achieving, and striving behaviors. So make sure to go to the website www.thisisdrz.com and add your name in the waitlist. Hope you enjoy this episode and see you next week. Bye bye.
Process-based therapy.
Oh, how
Okay.
was it?
Yeah, it was really good. I guess it's the beginning of I guess it builds on what ACT already is, but it's attempting to kind of bring together all these different therapeutic islands, and this is my view of it, in a way that I guess breaks down package barriers and lets everybody from different therapeutic orientations talk to each other and share ideas and share interventions and things like that. So it's a way of saying, well, in all these packages, whether it's ACT or schema therapy or psychodynamic, what is actually going on inside those things that's active? And then so that breaks apart the whole I guess trademark package thing, and allows you to kind of say, well, value clarification, let's say, is a active ingredient. You could teach this to anybody. This could be taught to hairdressers. This could be taught to, or there might be stuff in schema therapy that's like, the mature adult. I don't know much about schema therapy, but that to an ACT practitioner, they might be able to understand it and use some of that stuff. So it's pretty exciting because we just seem to create therapies every day, and I'm hoping we start to work together. Yeah.
That's right. There has been over the years all these packages of therapies, right? We have these beautiful acronyms, these labels. But if I can ask a little bit more, a couple of years ago, this was maybe 2003, 2004, maybe, I attended one presentation from David Barlow when he was presenting the Unified Protocol.
Yeah.
But at that time, there were maybe 10 groups talking about transdiagnostic processes.
Yeah.
And then over the years, that conversation has shifted to talk about more process-based work. How do you see this difference? That's talking about transdiagnostic process is different than the process-based therapy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in the same spirit. I think the challenge has been that, let me give you an example. David Barlow's Unified Protocol was an attempt to bring everything together. And it's similar, I think, to what a lot of ACT people have been trying to do, because ACT is a process-based therapy, right? It's about, you don't have to do things. So the idea is that you don't have, of a process-based approach, is you don't have to follow a protocol to be evidence-based. And nobody does anyway. No practitioner, nobody who's trying to help another person is going to sit there and rigidly follow the protocol. So it's about getting at the evidence-based process instead of evidence-based packages. Now with Barlow, I think he's a fellow traveler, but one thing that I found that limited me previously was that I was always coming from my perspective. So he's coming from a cognitive perspective. I'm coming from an ACT perspective. So like 3 years ago, I had this discussion with a friend and colleague who's a schema therapist. And we're trying to talk about how we try and help people in our therapy. So as he's talking about schema therapy, I'm converting everything to ACT terminology. I'm saying, oh, well, that's diffusion. When you talk about the mature adult or the angry child, that's like people are stepping back and noticing their social patterns and they're able to evaluate it functionally. But he's doing the same thing with me. He's taking ACT things and converting it to schema therapy terms. So we both have our terms. It's like two islands with different languages.
Yes.
And I think one of the big shifts recently, because I had the same conversation with him, but this time from a process-based perspective, is that there is, instead of insisting he speaks my language or I speak his, our approach with Steve Hayes and Stephan Hoffman, all them, is to use what's called the extended evolutionary meta model. That's a big phrase for basically, we try and create a language and a model that is not using the specific words of one specific therapy. That kind of is accepted by everybody. So everybody accepts evolution, right?
That's right.
Everybody accepts that so let me just give you a quick example of how evolution can be used to understand everything
Mm-hmm.
and all positive change. So somebody's struggling, they're kind of stuck. What do we do to help that person, whether it's a friend or a client? And so the key principles of change and evolution are variation,
Mm-hmm.
selection, and retention. Like, so that is the most fundamental elements of change that every life science accepts and every theory of clinical psychology accepts. Variation, selection, retention in a context. So it depends on the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody comes to me and they're struggling, and they're stuck, they're in a relationship that's not working, and they're fighting, and it's been going on for years, and if nothing seems to be working, and the first thing we try and do is get them to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
That may not be leaving the person, but it may be trying something different with the partner.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe so that's variation, right? So if they're stuck, we already know that they don't come to us as a friend or clinician to keep doing the same thing they've always done.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to try something. So that's variation. And then when they do the new thing, they try some new, let's say, relationship behavior. Maybe they start having a date night, or they try separating temporarily, or they kind of turn off the TV at a certain time. They just do something new. I don't know if any of
Mm-hmm.
this is going to work, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
variation is happening. So part of the skill will be getting people to do something new. Then you can have selection come in. So
Mm-hmm.
is this building value? Is this making your life better? So this will sound very familiar to you, Patricia, because it's like values in ACT. But every therapy, every approach has some sort of selection criteria. And then if we find something that's improving the relationship, wow, okay, so this is really improving your relationship. Or it might be, let's say you're working with physical health and you're like, okay, so when you eat this kind of food, you feel a lot more energy during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got selection happening. We're like, okay, yes, we got them to do something new, and now it's actually making their life better. Now, how do we help them to keep doing that? Because we all
Mm-hmm.
backslide into old habits. That's retention.
Sure. Got it.
So, and then with the evolutionary, let's just call it the EAM. It's extended evolutionary meta model. So you got variation, selection, retention. It's in context, right? So we know that sharing emotions may be important in a relationship, but maybe not always good in a workplace. So that's context, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sensitivity to context. And then it divides processes up in a way that so far every therapy I've looked at or every approach I've looked at has, things that target cognition, how you think, things that target emotion, things that target motivation. So it has 6 dimensions, and then it looks at kind of physiological level, psychological level, and social level. Anyway, it's a bit to go over right now, but the point is it's like having a periodic table, a common set of elements of every therapy, so that now when I talk to my friend about schema therapy, I don't try and translate it into my language. He doesn't translate it into his. We can go to this common ground and talk about it. And the conversation was very different this time. Last time it was like I would be trying to convert it to ACT, what he was saying, maybe because we were both a little defensive and taking pride in our own approaches. Well, that's just ACT. Oh, that's just schema therapy. That's just psychodynamic therapy. Oh, psychodynamic therapists have been doing this forever. So I think process-based approach allows us to kind of say, here's some common ground, and I don't have to negate what you're doing or the value of your approach, because we can stand on this common place and talk about it and share ideas, and you can retain your distinctiveness. It's like you do your intervention. It's like how an artist might differ. 2 artists might differ. They might be using the same ideas of perspective. They might be using the major minor keys in music. They might be using 7th chords in music, but they differ in how they express that. And so I feel like process-based therapy is a way for us to accept differences, but then come together and understand the commonality.
The way that you're talking is making me think how important it is to create a frame
and it seems that process-based therapy is doing that, creating a frame for different models coexisting with each other without imposing on each other. There's no need to force anything, right? EMM give us that frame. If I can unpack a little bit more, if we hold it as a frame, and that's the frame that we're holding to understand change, how a person changes their behavior, how would you define a process? I keep asking this question, and I have read through papers that you guys publish. How will you understand a process today?
Oh gosh, I have it written down. You're right, like to remember it spontaneously.
No worries.
It's oh gosh, you got me, Patricia. I really worked hard on the definition actually, because it was like torture. So I mean, I guess, okay, let me give it a try. A process is something that we target that orients the person towards adaptive and even vital outcomes. So it's something that is it's a change, it's a mechanism of change. It's the thing that we target in the person, that if they start doing that, they become, their life becomes better. And it's adaptation, I guess. So it does tend to have a lot of features. So process might be dynamic. So let's say we're working with the process of emotional acceptance. So we want to teach people the power of allowing difficult feelings rather than constantly avoiding and suppressing them. So this is a big step and a usually major change in people's life to realize, whoa, this distress is not the enemy. So dynamic means that it changes, like allowing and accepting emotions can start to change people's lives, and it can happen very slowly or incredibly rapidly. So that's the dynamic part. So process is dynamic, and that means also that it can go bidirectionally. So you might help people to sleep better, do breathing exercises, and that might help them to accept more. So acceptance, allowing of difficult feelings influences behavior, but behavior also influences that, and physiological states influence that. So dynamic. It's theory-based. So in ACT, we have a very clear theory about why avoidance doesn't work. It produces these ironic processes that when you try and suppress something, you think about it all the time and it comes back even more strongly. So process is dynamic, changes, sometimes slow, very rapidly. It's theory-based. Progressive. Okay, so third feature. So these are the change mechanisms, things we could do to orient people towards adaptive or vital outcomes. Progressive is the next feature of a process. And this means that the thing you're targeting is often ordered. So you might be, if you're working with a client that's been somebody who's been forced to see you, and you might, the first process you might do might need to be values, and not acceptance. For some people, experiential acceptance work targeting that process may come much later. And what I would call a motivational process, which is value clarification, might be super early with a mandated client. Or let's say you have somebody who's very accepting of their feelings. They're really good at describing them to you, and they diffuse from their cognition. And you're like, this is brilliant. Patricia's a brilliant therapist. They come in, they're very psychologically minded. And you're doing fantastic in therapy. And then they leave and they come back. And despite having all this knowledge and all this ability, they haven't done anything differently, right? So now, if we talk progressivity, then what you probably should be emphasizing instead of acceptance might be overt behavioral processes, like activating behavior. So that's what we mean by progressive, is that you order processes in a certain way. And the other dimensions, so I'm just giving you dimensions. But a process is just a change mechanisms you put into play to orient people towards positive outcomes. Contextually bound and modifiable is another feature of the process. So that means that what works for one client may not work for another client. What works in one situation, say in a marital relationship, may not work in the workplace. We find that with cognitive reappraisal, young people are less able to use this strategy than older people. So that's contextual bound. It's like the age, sophistication of their ability to use reappraisal. Reappraisal works for some, but not for others. Structured mindfulness may be another process that you put into play. That's the attentional process. And structured mindfulness practice may work for some, but really backfire for others who think, you know. So, and finally, the last feature is multi-level. And all that means is, and this is a really important piece of this, I think, that we think of these simultaneously occurring at the physiological level, psychological level, and social level. So, for example, let's take hope, which is meant to be a trans-diagnostic kind of feature of all interventions. So hope is the belief that you can achieve your goals and you know how to kind of get there. You know how to overcome barriers and you know the pathways. So it's agency. I feel like I can do it. And it's pathways. I feel like I know how to do it. So we obviously want our clients to, have this. This is maybe a cognitive process, I would say. So this is interesting. So now, psychologists tend to emphasize the psychological level. We're trained in cognitive therapy and we focus on psychological constructs. But let's look at hope and how it could be thought of in multiple dimensions. So hope might be something that, so let's say it's a cognitive process, that's the psychological level, but it might also occur at the physiological level. So for example, you might have heard of heart rate variability, which is an index of how, so just in case people don't know about heart rate variability, do you want me to explain?
Yeah, that's always helpful for people.
Yes, I'm trying to kind of talk about hope at multiple levels. This is the challenge. So hope is a cognitive process. If we, let's use hope as an example of this definition. So by building hope, we orient people towards starting to activate their life and build value and actually go out and do things, whereas hopeless people shut down. They think that nothing will work and nothing can improve their life. So there's no variation. There's no improved selection or retention. So let's say we're targeting hope, a cognitive process. So at the physiological level, it may be easier to make people hopeful if we increase parasympathetic activity and diminish fight or flight. So we have these two systems. Yeah, we have these two systems constantly homeostatically fighting each other, like the fight or flight threat system, and then the soothing, calm, explore system, we'll call that the soothing system and the threat system. So I'm talking physiologically now. And people like to think like this. There's a lot of heart rate variability is that balance between the fight and flight and the parasympathetic system. So both of these are, so it's like, just to use a metaphor, it's like the parasympathetic system is taking the heart to slow down, take it easy, and the fight or flight system saying, speed up, there might be something going on here, it could be dangerous. And so when you're biologically flexible, they're both kind of operating on the heart and your heart's varying a lot. When you're not biologically flexible, and I think this would probably be also low hope, that fight or flight system is just dominating. The stress is just dominating. The heart is very, very steady. You think this is a good thing. It's not a good thing because it means that you've just, like, your system is just on threat and high alert. It's just boom, boom, just very steady. And that's bad. The parasympathetic system, which we might think of as the brakes, are not, or they've been cut or something, and the sympathetic system, which is the gas pedal, is on all the time. So one idea is that if you can increase heart rate variability, which is that balance between threat and soothing systems, then you might be more optimistic and more hopeful. It feels, you feel more able to kind of, so that's a complicated way of illustrating what hope might look like at the physiological level.
Yeah. Can I interject a little bit? So you just shared two super cool examples, one about emotional acceptance and about hope, how we can think of it at different levels in a dynamic process, progressive, and leading to change in a person's life.
Yes.
And we acknowledge that its context-based, knowing that this change may be effective and energizing and revitalizing in one particular situation, but not in all of them.
Yes. Yes.
So when I think of emotional acceptance and hope, I'm thinking about what a person experiences. Is that a process? Will uncertainty be a process? No knowing, I'm feeling ambiguous, I'm feeling stressed because I don't know how things are going to go. Will that be a process or not?
It's interesting you say that. We've got a system for classifying processes. So I'm trying to think.
Lovely.
And we've done a recent review. It's in behavior research and therapy that looked at all the world's processes that have been identified in mediational studies.
Lovely. Okay.
And I'm trying to think where uncertainty would fall. Sounds like a cognitive process. So you're saying like you want them. So help me out.
If I don't know how this podcast is going to go, I don't know how my next session is going to go, I don't know what's going to happen when I jump on a plane, and I am prone to get stressed with ambiguous, unplanned, and uncertain situations, I may over-prepare, over-plan. If I'm on the plane, I may have like 5 masks with me.
Sounds like you've done this, Penny. You're such a good example. It sounds so close to the heart.
No, I'm very creative. And also fear-based stuff. So it's my cup of tea. So if I start thinking, okay, I was an immigrant and I was born in the middle of a dictatorship, and I grew up in an environment in which fear was shaping people's behaviors. So of course, as an adult, I'm going to be more prone to be hyper-vigilant. And it's manageable, but from time to time, I encounter something I know, and I do all those things, and then I don't hang out with my friends. I don't want to do anything because it's not safe enough, because I'm very busy preparing. Will uncertainty be a process?
Yeah. So, gosh. So let's go through this. You've just about hit every single process. Self. So okay. So this is. So I think there's a whole bunch of processes there, Patricia.
Okay.
And so let's start with, let's see if we can walk through the problem as you might see it and conceptualize it. And as we do that, I'll try and say I think this is the process, this is the process, this process, and we'll see. And that's a good way to kind of go through it.
Lovely.
So let's say, so that you've got this kind of perfectionist thing going on, this over planning, this kind of over preparing, which sounds like it's really messing with your life because it leads to all these behaviors, extra food blanket, to kind of, shutting down your social life. So can you think of it, well, a client or something, just imagine that you're a client or whatever. And when this kind of shutting down process happens, like this perfectionistic, the first thing I want to know is what was the context where that kind of gets elicited. So we want to talk a little bit about context. Okay.
So let's think about this podcast. I get an email that says, in 3 hours, you have this upcoming interview with Joseph Siarocki. And the way that I think of Joseph is this great researcher, incredible clinician, very well-known academician. And then my heart beats fast a little bit. And then I say, oh man, what if I mess up? How is it going to go? What am I going to ask? And then what I do, I start searching all the papers you have published.
So right there, I mean, like just to illustrate, so I hear those processes that are labeled cognitive process are one of them. And we can see the worry and the what ifing showing up. So right there, all the things we know about helping people to break from worry and all that would be cognitive processes. So what might then we also had affect. Clearly, you experienced the distress of uncertainty. So the question is, when that feeling shows up, so these are affective processes, what's your reaction? How do you react to those feelings? So we might help you to kind of explore what that feels like when you hit that uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
and practice not reacting. So we might do that in session. We might say, okay, Patricia, let's actually go there. Let's go. You've got 3 hours and you're not going to be prepared. You're going to screw this up. You haven't read my papers and you've got COVID and you've got all kinds of reasons why you're going to screw this up. You should be freaking out. And I might just ask, what does that feel like in your body? Where do you feel it in your body? And so that's what I'm actually doing right there is an effective process where I'm getting you to, helping you to experience your feelings, but not react to it with your normal defensive strategies.
Right.
So we're doing, and that's variation too, isn't it? Because now, instead of doing the normal Patricia over-preparing, going crazy thing, you're now doing something else. So that would be an example of an effective process. For the worry, we might do a cognitive process. We might notice the worries, like what if I screw up? What if Joseph, sees that I'm a complete imposter?
Idiot.
Yeah, idiot. I'll have to find your voice.
Complete idiot.
Oh, such a harsh inner voice. Goodness.
Oh my goodness, this microphone catches everything.
And so this is where we get flexible, Patricia, because, if I'm honest with you, I do reappraise a lot. I'll say, I'll play around with it. Like I'm flexibly reappraising, but with cognition, I might say, look, you've done this with lots of people in podcasts and you've always managed it. You've always done well. So see, you can start to see how this makes an ACT practitioner more flexible. Because when I started ACT, I was like, oh no, we can't get him to reappraise. I would have gone to something like, notice your worrying thoughts about Joseph. Notice the thought, I'm an idiot, and da-da-da-da-da. But I might actually do a CBT type thing where I'm like, the cognitive process is, you've done this a lot before. Now, what might happen then, this is a contextual assessment. I'm trying to put a cognitive process in play. If you push back and start to say, that's bullshit, blah, 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 then I might let go and do a different cognitive process. Maybe it's diffusion. I might help you to hold the worries lightly, or maybe you would set aside 5 minutes just to, okay, Patricia, here's what we're going to do. We're going to acknowledge your advisor, your inner voice, and we're just going to give that advisor 5 minutes to just have go. So I want you to set aside 5 minutes and all you're going to do is worry and write down those thoughts and everything you're worried about. Just let it go. And then after that, you've done your worrying. So I'm just giving you lots of things I might try. And I'll pay attention to what works with you. So I'm getting you to do different things with your thoughts. I'm noticing, does Patricia respond well to this? And if it does, then I'd say, okay, that really worked for you. Wow. So maybe we should do that again in the future. So we've got effective processes. We've got cognitive processes. Now the behavioral processes, when you were talking about, okay, I want extra food, blankets, I over prepare, blah, 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 blah. So another process, and that's like, okay, Patricia, I might target that as a process. I might say, well, okay, you're having these thoughts and you're having these feelings and you do this behavior, which consumes your time and so preoccupying. What can we do behaviorally to change that? Can we set a limit to how long, for example, you prepare? Can we say, here's the rule, I'm only going to prepare for 30 minutes. Can we set a goal to have it done at a certain time and then that's it? So kind of the behavioral processes might be goal setting, setting limits on how long you work on something. So it's actually overt behavior is the process I'm talking about here. And then you mentioned how it interferes with your friendships and relationships. And so I'm like, well, I want to motivate Patricia to do something different. So now we're in the motivational processes. So it sounds like you're really clear with your values, but not everybody is. So I might say, what are you losing? What are you giving up here? And that's a motivational process, like making values more prominent so that the value, so people have to choose between maybe a long-term value of having relationships versus a short-term goal of alleviating distress and feeling not like an idiot. Making that choice clear is like a motivational intervention. So we are covering, I'm going to cover every single process. We got cognition, affect, behavior, motivation. 4, attention, that's 5. So it's like helping you to notice become mindful of when you click into this perfectionistic spiral. So
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing would be building the awareness of starting to notice what show, so that is even that context, like when does this happen? Does it
Mm-hmm.
happen to you when you are faced with uncertainty and maybe something where you're working with somebody? Well, you tell me, when do you notice this perfectionistic spiral happening?
For me, it's when I deeply care about something, when I
Yeah.
deeply care about a project I'm participating on, a conversation I'm going to have, that
Yep.
naturally comes with a sense of uncertainty because I care. And of course, I want it to go well. I want it to
Yeah.
be helpful. So then my
Yep.
mind may go into blah, 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 and my heart too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's more like that's the attention process, is helping you to see when this trigger is happening, to notice it, and to be able to come back into the present moment and really be here with me, for example. So if you were in that perfectionist spiral, you might be thinking, oh God, I got to cover so much today with Joseph. I've got to look impressive. I've got to da, 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 da. And just noticing when you've gone away into that, I've got to be Patricia, the multi-author, highly successful woman. I've got to come out across like that. You say, oh, I'm doing that. You just gently bring yourself back to me. And it's like, that Notting Hill. I'm just a man standing in front of a woman having a conversation.
I love it.
That kind of
love it.
simplified. So we've got all. So now one last process. So we have cognition, affect, overt behavior, motivation, and I've covered. And that one was attention. It's like mindful. There's one last. The sixth process is self, and this one's a deep one. It is tied to how you think of yourself and what it would mean for you to make a mistake and be imperfect. Like, what would it mean for you to screw up as a person? What do you think, like not being perfect, what might that say about you if you screw up here? You don't look like super intelligent all the time, but the self is like, who's Patricia if she's not achieving, if she's not doing it all? If she, who are you? Like, why? It almost sounds like a shield or a protective thing. Like you just, you always appear so perfect. You always look perfect. It looks like your hair is perfectly done today. So what time it is in America?
It's midday.
Okay. So you would be expected. You didn't just wake up. Okay.
No, not this time. Other times, yeah.
So, that's nice. Like, so Patricia, the perfect, the flawless, the unassailable, that's more like the self. And that's okay to have that. I mean, if the self is, that sense of self is useful, but you're saying sometimes Patricia, the flawless, the unassailable, the perfect is not working for you. And it's like that. So that's pretty deep. I mean, it's like, so if we were to work with the self here, we might, do some stuff where we start to see that this sense of self is just, it's not who you are. You know what I mean? They're just the ways you categorize yourself. And we kind of cling to those categories, like our egos, to protect ourselves, to feel safe.
Yeah.
And I do that too. I have lots of ego. I cling to ideas about myself. A few years ago, I went through a really tough time where I was, I think of myself as a successful academic, and I do everything to be perfect at it. And, there was downsizing happening in my workplace, and I was under threat, and they were saying I wasn't doing a good enough job. And this was massively shattering to my ego. Like, you don't even realize that you're clinging to an aspect of yourself until it's under attack, until it doesn't work anymore. And for me, it was like my entire definition of myself was as a successful, unassailable academic doing really well. And this just shattered, and I realized how much I was clinging to that idea of myself, and it almost like destroying the self. The self is the most complicated process sometimes. It was extremely difficult for me to cope with it. I felt like, who am I? I'm at a loss. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I have no value, no meaning. So I was clinging to that sense of, as a way of protecting myself and feeling good about myself. And when it was shattered, it was, so this is deeper than just cognition, this sense of self, to be able to let go of, I'm just a human being. I'm not like an important academic. I'm not an important person. I had to learn to let go of that sense of self, to recognize that that wasn't me. And when I set that down, that sense of self, and I could just be a human being again, it took years. This is not an easy process to let go of these senses of self, to flexibly be able to let go of it. It took years, and finally I got through it, and I realized, I became more flexible with that. I don't always need to be doing the things that are impressive to academics. So one of the things that affected me on was like, I would maybe do stuff that was successful for my career, that was playing the game, but wasn't very helpful to human being. You know what I mean? So playing the game, it would be like if we were to try and just go out of our way to sell our book, and that's all we cared about. And we did it so much that we were neglecting the actual reason we wrote the book in the first place, which was to actually help people and make a difference. So the self is probably the in some ways the deepest of the processes, because it's so hidden. We just, Patricia, who is Patricia? It's kind of like a difference in a background. It's hidden. You're not really aware of it until you come up against it, when you make a mistake or you are imperfect. And it's suddenly like it's not just I have an irrational belief like a cognition. It's like an existential threat to your entire existence. It's deep.
That's right. I think that when we ask ourselves and we ask our clients, who are we without the doing? Who are we without all the stuff that we do and all the things that we do to protect ourselves? How do you experience ourselves? I think that's what you're tapping into, right? This sense of self. And I relate to what you're describing, on the sense that so much of our actions in life get organized around that identity that we hold on to, like that facade that we have.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I will very much appreciate it if you will subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And if you're feeling extra generous, I welcome a review on Apple Podcasts. Show notes of this episode are in the website playingitsafe.zone. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter so you can receive more tips to stop all types of unworkable playing it safe actions. See you soon!